haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The stars over Ultramar flickered like dying embers in a hearth that no longer knew warmth. Once they had burned with the fierce constancy of faith, each light a testament to the Imperium's eternal claim over the void. Now they dimmed, each one seeming to waver, as if the galaxy itself held its breath, waiting for a shadow it could not name. On the fortress world of Mythology, the marble spires and basalt walls caught the glow of these waning suns and turned them into mournful silhouettes, as if the stones themselves wept for what was to come. And so we stand together, you and I, before this moment of great unravelling. In a universe as vast and cruel as this, your presence here matters. Know that we truly love and care for you, for without witnesses, no tale holds weight. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. The void had not yet screamed, but its silence was heavier than war drums. It was in this silence that Lord Commander Arthur Valen stood upon the battlements of Mythology, his armoured gauntlets clasped behind his back, his gaze drawn outward to the endless black. He was a man carved by duty, lines of command etched deeper into his face than any scar. His armour gleamed with the heraldry of the Imperium, yet he carried the weight of decisions unspoken. For years, he had fought wars that seemed eternal, each victory a reprieve rather than a triumph, each oath renewed with blood that never dried. Yet tonight, the silence of the void pressed against his heart like a blade. Behind him, the council chambers roared with the voices of admirals, generals, and bureaucrats who clung to pride as drowning men cling to driftwood. They argued of troop movements, planetary tithes, and fleet dispositions, while whispers of a nameless hunger from the eastern fringe were dismissed as superstition. But Valen had heard the signals, broken and desperate, carried across the Imperium like prayers left unanswered. A world gone silent. A fleet vanished without wreckage. A lone astropath screaming until his mind burned to ash. He thought of that astropath often. The echo of the scream haunted Valen's dreams, not for its sound, but for its absence of humanity. It had not been the cry of a man. It had been the sound of something larger, something vast and unfathomable brushing against mortal thought. And though his council dismissed it, Valen could not. He had seen too much in his long years to mistake dread for superstition. As he turned from the parapet, his eyes caught the golden aquila carved upon the wall, wings spread wide as if to shield humanity itself. He remembered when such symbols had filled him with faith. Now they felt like gravestones, reminders of promises too large for any man to uphold. Inside, the chamber smelled of incense and iron. Candles guttered beneath the high vaults, their flames trembling in unseen draughts. Admiral Calthan's voice rang, loudest. There is no proof of these so-called devourers. Ghost stories whispered by failing colonies. The eastern fringe has always been treacherous. Pirates, warp storms, nothing more. Valen said nothing. His silence was its own kind of rebellion. Yet even as he stood motionless, a battle stirred within him. He had sworn oaths before the Emperor's image, oaths that had demanded his soul as much as his sword. But now those oaths felt like chains. If there truly was a hunger beyond imagining creeping into the galaxy, could the Imperium's decrees protect them, or would obedience deliver them to ruin? A voice slipped through the din, quiet, but sharp as a blade. You have seen it, haven't you, Commander? It was Inquisitor Marbrin, a shadow draped in sable robes, eyes like knives hidden beneath the hood. The man's presence carried no warmth, only the weight of secrets. You have felt it in your marrow, the shadow that eats light. Deny it if you wish, but it lingers in you. Valen turned, his jaw set. I serve the Emperor. And yet you doubt, Marbrin whispered, close enough that no other could hear. Doubt is not betrayal, Commander. It is foresight. The hunger that comes is not like Orc or Eldar. It is not a war that can be fought with steel alone. To resist it, you will need more than loyalty. You will need choices the Imperium dares not sanction. Valen's fist clenched. Choices such as yours. Marbrin's silence was answer enough. The Inquisition trafficked in truth too poisonous for ordinary men. Forbidden knowledge, weapons whispered of in archives that no light touched. And though Valen had long despised their arrogance, in this moment, some terrible part of him longed to believe the Inquisitor was right. A messenger burst into the chamber then, voice trembling as he clutched a data slate. Distress call received. Valador system. No survivors reported. Entire planet stripped. His words faltered, as though to speak them was to summon the fate itself. All matter reduced to biomass. The council erupted. Voices clashed like swords. Some demanded immediate redeployment of fleets. Others shouted of lies, of manufactured panic. Valen stood apart, hearing none of it, only the hollow echo of the astropath's last scream in his mind. He knew the truth before the words left the messenger's lips. Something had awakened, something beyond the comprehension of men who thought themselves rulers of the stars. Later that night, when the council had dissolved into bickering and denial, Valen returned once more to the battlements. The stars above looked dimmer still, their light smothered by invisible wings. His gauntlets rested upon cold stone as he tried to summon the faith that had once carried him through endless wars. But faith was a frail shield against shadows that consumed entire worlds. Marbrin's words returned to him, whispering like serpents. Choices the Imperium dares not sanction. Immortality whispered of in hushed tones, salvation that might damn him forever. He had not chosen yet, but the thought had nested within him, and he knew it would not die. In the silence of the void, something moved. Not sound, not light, but presence, a pressure upon the soul, as if the galaxy itself shivered. Valen straightened, his heart pounding as he realized he was not alone upon the battlements. Not truly. Across the gulf of stars, a hunger stirred, a hunger vast enough to strip galaxies bare, a hunger that would come for Ultramar, for Macragge, for every soul who dared call the void their own. Valen whispered into the night, though no one could hear him. Emperor, forgive me. For the first time in all his years, he did not know if forgiveness would come. The corridors of Macragge's fortress hummed with the faint vibrations of machinery buried deep within stone, a ceaseless heartbeat of an empire that pretended eternity. Lord Commander Arthur Valen walked them as though in a dream, each echo of his armoured boots resounding like accusations. The council had broken into fragments of pride and denial, yet their voices still rang in his skull. Ghost stories, they had said, mere whispers, yet he knew the taste of truth when it seared his tongue. He had seen war enough to recognize the shape of death before it descended. He entered the war room, its vast hololithic projectors casting broken light across his face. The map of Ultramar sprawled before him in ghostly green, lines of defense like fragile veins stretched across systems that seemed suddenly too small, too breakable. Valador was already gone, consumed by an enemy they refused to name. He stared at the hollow circle where its star should have burned, and felt as if he were gazing at his own future. The chamber doors opened with a hiss, and Captain Darren strode in, helm under one arm, his scarred face marked by exhaustion. Darren had served with Valen for decades, his loyalty proven in fire and ruin. "My lord," he said, voice rough, "I have spoken with the scouts who returned from the fringe. Their words are confused, but they saw things. Skies turned black with wings, seas that rose as if alive, the land itself stripped to bone." Valen closed his eyes. The confirmation was no victory, and the council will not hear it. "They do not wish to," Darren muttered. "Pride is a veil thicker than steel. But you, my lord, you must decide. Do we prepare? Do we call for reinforcements? Or do we wait for orders that may never come?" Valen looked at him, and for a fleeting moment he wished he could speak freely, confess the storm boiling inside him. But duty wrapped chains around his tongue. "We hold the line," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Darren's eyes narrowed. "And if the line cannot be held?" The silence between them spoke louder than command. At last, Darren bowed his head. "Then I will stand beside you until the end." His footsteps faded into the corridors, leaving Valen alone with the flickering map of dying stars. When the room was empty, another shadow emerged from the far corner. Inquisitor Marbrin, silent as a phantom, his robes trailing like spilled ink. His eyes glimmered in the hololithic glow. "Your captain is loyal," he said softly. "But loyalty is a chain, not a shield. It binds you to a fate that was written long before you were born." Valen did not turn. "You move like a carrion bird, Inquisitor. Do you smell death already?" "I smell inevitability," Marbrin replied. He approached, hands clasped as though in prayer. "The Imperium will not save you. It never has. It demands sacrifice until there is nothing left, and calls that survival. But what comes now will not be endured by sacrifice alone. This hunger will not pause at banners or oaths." "And you have an answer?" Valen asked, his voice edged with scorn. Marbrin's lips curved, though it was no smile. "There are weapons hidden in vaults sealed by silence, knowledge forbidden to all but those who dare see beyond obedience. If you would wield them, you could not only resist what comes, you could endure it, perhaps even live beyond it." The words slithered into Valen's thoughts like serpents seeking warmth. He turned at last, eyes burning with restrained fury. "Immortality, that is what you offer." "Not offer," Marbrin said. "Reveal. It exists, whether you grasp it or not. Others have reached for it, some in secret, some in arrogance. Most were broken, but you, Lord Commander, you are already broken. That is why you could survive it." Valen's gauntleted fist struck the console, scattering the green light into fragments. "I serve the Emperor." "And what does the Emperor serve?" Marbrin's voice cut the air like a blade. "An Imperium that devours its own children, that builds fortresses out of their bones. Tell me, Commander, how many lives have you traded to preserve a star that would have burned without you? How many worlds did you abandon to fulfill an oath that has never fulfilled you?" Valen's breath grew harsh. Memory flooded him. Soldiers dying nameless on shattered plains. Cities offered as sacrifices to buy weeks of survival. The hollow eyes of children evacuated too late. And above it all, the scream of that astropath, a cry that had never been human. Marbrin leaned closer, his whisper coiling in the Valen's ear. "The hunger that comes will strip even memory from the stars, unless you claim a place beyond its reach, unless you embrace what the Imperium calls forbidden. You can be more than mortal. You can be eternal." The chamber seemed smaller, the shadows deeper. Valen's heartbeat thundered like drums of war, yet within it pulsed a quieter rhythm, fear, not of death, but of being forgotten, of becoming another nameless casualty in the Emperor's ledger. For a moment, he saw himself not as saviour nor commander, but as dust scattered across a void indifferent to all oaths. Marbrin withdrew, leaving silence in his wake. You need not answer tonight, but when the shadow falls, remember this. The Emperor will not remember you. Eternity might. He vanished into the corridor, leaving Valan alone with his thoughts, and the hololithic stars still flickering like dying embers. Later, Valan returned to his quarters. The chamber was cold, the stone walls heavy with the scent of oil and incense. He removed his armour piece by piece, each plate falling with the weight of a coffin lid. Beneath it, he was only a man, flesh, scarred and weary. He stared into the mirror of polished steel above his desk, and the face that stared back was not a hero's nor a tyrant's, but something caught between. He thought of Daeron, of loyalty burning until it turned to ash. He thought of Marbrin, of whispers that coiled around truth and poison alike. He thought of the Imperium, vast and unyielding, yet blind to the storm clawing at its gates. And he thought of the hunger, vast, nameless, infinite, that already licked at the edges of Ultramar. When he finally lay upon the coal slab that served as a bed, sleep did not come easily, and when it did, it came not with rest but with visions. He saw skies torn open, worlds stripped to bone, oceans rising as walls of flesh. He saw the Aquila crumble, its wings gnawed away by teeth that never ceased. He saw himself standing alone upon a battlefield of silence, his armour corroded, his name forgotten. And in the darkness, a voice without words asked him the only question that mattered. Would you endure? Valan woke with a start, his chest heaving, sweat chilling his skin. The stars beyond the viewport glimmered faintly, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw them shift, as though wings unseen passed across their light. He rose, pressing his palm to the cold glass. The hunger was real. The question lingered, and though he had not yet spoken the answer, he knew the path within him had already begun to bend. The council chamber was a cathedral of stone and steel, lit by braziers that hissed with sacred oils, their flames straining against the high shadows. Beneath the towering arches sat rows of commanders, robed ministers, and armoured lords whose voices clashed like steel on steel. The scent of incense could not mask the reek of fear that had begun to settle, though fear itself was never named. To name it would be to give it power. Lord Commander Valan stood at the head of the chamber, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the hololithic stars projected above the council dais. They shimmered faintly, but some had already dimmed, marked by silent runes of systems lost. He had expected the council to gather with urgency, to meet the growing shadow with unity. Instead, he found only walls of arrogance. Ghosts, Admiral Calthon barked, his voice sharp and brittle. His armour gleamed with polish, as though its shine might blind the truth. Phantoms spun from frightened tongues. Worlds fall, they always have. To leap at shadows is to dishonour the fleets that hold the line with real steel, real fire. Murmurs of agreement rose from several officers. Others shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent, unwilling to stand against pride so deeply rooted. Valan's eyes narrowed, but he held his tongue. He remembered Daeron's words, the loyalty that burned steady despite the storm. He remembered Marbrin's whispers, coiled like vipers in the marrow of his thoughts. And he remembered the visions, the endless hunger that had stalked his dreams. He had seen enough to know that silence here was a betrayal of its own. entire planet stripped bare, he said at last, his voice low yet carrying across the chamber like a drawn blade. Valador is gone. Do you deny this? Do you explain away the silence of its astropaths, the absence of wreckage, the soil that no longer breathes? A silence fell, brief but heavy, before Calthon sneered. Worlds have burned before. The orcs leave ruins. The Eldar leave ash. What proof is there of this absurdity? Creatures that eat entire worlds. Do you not hear how mad that sounds? Valin's hand clenched at his side. Madness, yes, but truth often sounded like madness until it tore the gates down. He stepped forward, his shadow spilling long across the stone. I do not bring you tales, Admiral. I bring you warnings. Dismiss them, and you will condemn more than Valador. You will condemn Ultramar itself. The chamber erupted, voices rising in a storm of pride and panic. Ministers cried for calm, others shouted for war. Old rivalries cracked open like wounds long festering. The chamber became a battlefield of words, each syllable another stone thrown in defiance of reality. And yet amid the storm, a single voice pierced through, steady and cold. Inquisitor Marbrin. He stood near the chamber's edge, hood lowered, his face illuminated by the dying light of the braziers. The Lord Commander speaks truth, he said, each word a nail driven into silence. I have seen the reports, the images, flesh rivers, skies blackened, mountains consumed. This is no mere war. This is hunger incarnate, and it comes for us all. Shock rippled through the room. The word of an inquisitor carried the weight of iron, and even the proudest lords hesitated, yet hesitation was not unity. Lies, Calthon hissed, though his voice faltered. The Inquisition spins terror to justify its excess. I will not bow to fear-mongering. Marbrin's gaze fixed on him, unblinking. Then you will bow to extinction. The chamber broke again, voices colliding, arguments splintering into chaos. Valen stood amidst it, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt not his own. He wanted to shout, to command silence, to break them into order with the certainty they demanded. But certainty had fled him. Within, a deeper conflict gnawed. The Imperium demanded obedience, yet obedience now seemed a path to ruin. To resist was betrayal, but to obey was death. As the chamber roared, Valen's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to his youth. He remembered the first oath he had sworn, kneeling before the image of the Emperor, vowing to give his life without question. He remembered believing that vow was unshakable, eternal. But oaths were forged in ignorance, and ignorance was a luxury he no longer had. The chamber's voices dulled to a distant murmur as he stared at the hololithic stars. Each one that flickered out seemed to echo the dying suns in his visions, each collapse another reminder of how fragile even eternity could be. He felt the weight of choice pressing harder with each breath. Then Daeron's voice rose above the din, not loud, but cutting. If we cannot agree, then we will perish divided. Debate will not shield us when the void itself darkens. His scarred face was grim, but his eyes burned with conviction. Lord Commander, give us the word. Tell us how we stand. The room stilled. Dozens of eyes turned to Valen, waiting. Even Calthon's scorn faltered. For a moment, he could almost believe they might listen. That unity could be forged, not by faith in the Imperium, but by fear of what approached. But Marbrin's gaze found him then, and Valen felt the weight of it. The Inquisitor's eyes held no plea, no demand, only inevitability. The hunger would come, whether the Council agreed or not. And behind Marbrin's silence lingered the forbidden promise. There is another way. Valen drew breath, feeling the weight of 1,000 lives pressing down on every syllable. "We prepare," he said, his voice measured, iron held in restraint. "Whether the Council accepts the threat or denies it, we will fortify. We will summon every fleet we can muster, and we will stand." A murmur ran through the chamber, half relief, half doubt. Some nodded, some scoffed, but none could ignore the finality in his tone. Calton rose, face pale with rage. "You risk everything on fear and whispers. If you lead us into folly, Commander, it will be your name etched in disgrace." Valen met his gaze. Better disgrace than oblivion. The chamber broke again into clamour, but Valen no longer listened. He felt Daeron's hand briefly touch his shoulder, a gesture of quiet loyalty, before the captain stepped back into the fray. He felt Marbrin's presence still watching, patient as a serpent coiled in the dark. And above them all, he felt the cold eyes of the stars, waiting for judgment. As the council descended into yet another storm of words, Valen withdrew. The corridors swallowed him, their silence deeper than the chamber's noise. He walked alone, the echo of his boots the only sound. His thoughts churned with doubt and dread, yet within them burned a strange clarity. The Imperium was not ready. The Council would never be ready. And in the stillness, he whispered to himself the words that had haunted his dreams. "Would you endure?" He did not yet know the answer, but already he felt the question binding itself into his soul, as inescapable as the shadow that crept ever closer across the stars. The void was never silent. It groaned with the echoes of dying suns, the crackle of radiation storms, the whispers of the warp bleeding through thin places. Yet when the frigate Aquila's spear glided into the Valador system, there was nothing. No song of static, no beacon signals, not even the lingering murmur of drifting wreckage. Just absence, vast and unbroken, like a wound that swallowed all sound. Lord Commander Valen stood upon the observation deck. As the system spread before him, his breath caught against the glass. Where once a world had thrived, fields of harvest, oceans that glittered blue, hives that sang with industry, there was now only bone. Not bone of men, but of the earth itself. The planet's crust was stripped to ridges and pale gullies. Oceans boiled to vapour, mountains gnawed to ash. A world hollowed out, left nothing but a husk. Around him, officers shifted uneasily, their faces pale in the ghostly light. Even hardened veterans, men who had faced orc warbands and seen chaos corruption in its foulest forms, struggled to comprehend. Captain Daeron's jaw clenched so tightly, his scarred cheek twitched. "By the throne," he whispered, "they left nothing." "Not even ruins," another officer muttered. "The orcs would have left fire. The Eldar ash. This is nothing." Valen did not reply. His eyes traced the gouges carved across the planet's surface, not as random destruction, but as a pattern, consumption, methodical and precise. It was not hate that had unmade Valador. It was hunger. The Vox crackled. "Lord Commander, we've found survivors. Shuttle en route." Valen turned sharply, surprise flickering through the despair. Survivors. He had not dared hope. Perhaps they would bring clarity, or madness. The shuttle touched down in the hangar, its hull scorched, the wings trembling as though it had fought to remain whole. From within staggered three figures. A guardsman half dead with wounds, an astropath bound in chains of silence, and a child, hollow-eyed, clutching a broken toy carved of bone. The guardsman collapsed first, his words spilling like blood from a severed vein. Sky, alive, wings blacker than night. The ground moved. The seas, they rose. His breath rattled, His body convulsed, and he died before the Medici could reach him. The astropath remained silent, her eyes clouded white, her mind shattered. She rocked back and forth, her lips forming silent prayers that never found voice. Her chains rattled softly, reminders of the madness that had claimed her. But it was the child who spoke, her voice too calm for her years. "They ate everything," she said, staring at Valen as if he alone carried the weight of her words. "Not just people. The world. They ate the world." Valen felt the chill settle deeper in his bones. He dismissed the Medicae, dismissed the officers, and knelt before the child. "What did you see?" Her eyes were wide, hollow with memory. A sea that walked, a sky that screamed, and voices in the dark that promised they would never stop. He reached out, gently taking the broken toy from her trembling hands. It was carved into the shape of a bird, its wings jagged, its head missing. He held it as though it were a relic of something lost forever. When he rose, Dairon was waiting, his eyes sharp with unspoken questions. "You believe her," he said. Valen nodded once. "More than I believe the council." A murmur passed through the officers behind him, fear barely restrained. Some muttered prayers, others curses, and though none dared say it aloud, Valen could see it in their eyes. Doubt. Doubt in the Imperium's strength. Doubt in their survival. Doubt in him. That night, as the fleet drifted in orbit over Valador's corpse, Valen walked the ruined decks of the observation spire. Through fractured glass panels, he watched the dead world spin beneath, its silence heavier than the roar of any battle. The child's words gnawed at him. They ate the world. Marbrin appeared again, as if summoned by doubt itself. His shadow stretched long across the deck, his voice low and measured. "Now you see, not with reports, not with whispers, but with your own eyes. The Imperium will deny this until it is too late. You know this. You have always known." Valen did not turn. "And what would you have me do? Break faith? Abandon the Emperor's will? That path is death." Marbrin moved closer, his robes whispering like dry leaves. "No, that path is chains. Death would be mercy, but chains will bind you to a cause already lost. You saw the child. You saw the world. The hunger will not stop. You can fight it with faith and watch all you love consumed. Or you can endure. There are ways." Valen's hand tightened around the broken toy, its jagged edges biting into his palm. "You tempt me with heresy." "I tempt you with survival," Marbrin hissed. "The Imperium calls knowledge heresy when it fears its own weakness. But this is not a foe of men or gods. It is the end of all things, unless you are willing to do what others will not." Valen turned at last, eyes burning. "And what price would I pay?" Marbrin's face was still, his expression unreadable. "The same price any man pays who dares step beyond mortality. You will lose yourself, but you will live. Perhaps long enough to fight them as none else can." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Valen felt the weight of it pressing on his chest, heavier than any armor. He looked again at the dead world, its scars etched into eternity, and wondered if chains of faith were not worse than chains of damnation. Behind him, Dairon approached, his voice heavy with restrained anger. "My lord, the men ask what we will tell them. They saw the world. They know, and they look to you." Valen straightened, the toy still in his grip. His face betrayed nothing, though his heart was a battlefield of doubts. "Tell them we prepare. Tell them this was no war of men, but a devouring. Tell them we will stand, even if the Imperium turns its face away. Darren studied him, eyes narrowing as though glimpsing the fracture lines in his command, but he saluted, sharp and certain. "As you command." When he was gone, Valen remained by the viewport, staring into the abyss that had claimed Valador. He whispered to the silence, to the stars, to the hunger he could feel pressing against the veil. Would you endure? And though no answer came, he felt the question carve itself deeper into his soul, a wound that would never close. The fires of Valador's death still glimmered in Valen's thoughts when he returned to Macragga. The fortress world was alive with movement. Soldiers drilling in the ice fields, fleets resupplying, tithe wagons clattering through the gates. Yet beneath the iron discipline there was an unease that could not be caged. Word had spread, as it always did. Whispers in the mess halls. Prayers clutched tighter in calloused hands. The shadow had crossed the veil, and though the council tried to veil it in denial, the people felt it in their bones. Valen strode through the citadel corridors like a man burdened by stone. His armor gleamed, but the weight beneath it was not steel. The child's hollow eyes, the guardsman's broken voice, the empty scars upon Valador. These followed him like ghosts. He carried them into every chamber, every glance of his captains, every word he spoke that demanded belief he did not fully hold. It was in that exhaustion that Inquisitor Marbrin sought him. The man did not announce himself, did not request audience. He simply appeared in the war room when the night cycle drowned the halls in shadow. The projectors glowed with faint constellations, their light throwing pale shapes across the Inquisitor's gaunt face. "You hide your fear well," Marbrin said, voice soft as a blade drawn in the dark. "But it bleeds through the cracks. I see it. They see it. Even the men who march beneath your command feel the weight of your silence." Valen did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the star charts, on the fragile lines of defense sketched across Ultramar like veins ready to burst. "And what would you have me do, Inquisitor? Tell them the truth, that the galaxy has birthed a hunger that cannot be named, that it will consume us all no matter how we bleed to stop it. Shall I rip away their faith and leave them naked before the dark?" Marbrin stepped closer, robes whispering. "No, you give them faith to hold their ground, but you give yourself truth to survive. Those are not the same thing." Valen's jaw tightened. "You speak of forbidden things again." Marbrin's eyes gleamed in the half-light. "I speak of the only things that matter. You know the Imperium will not save you. The Council will argue until the void swallows their tongues. The High Lords will not move until the eastern fringe is ash. And you—" His hand lifted, a finger pointing like an executioner's decree. "You will die, and your name will be forgotten, unless you step beyond the chains of obedience." Valen turned to him then, fury burning beneath restraint. "You dare tempt me with heresy while my men bleed for the Emperor's name. You dare whisper of immortality while a child cradles the corpse of her world." Marbrin did not flinch. "It is precisely because of that child that I dare. Because you saw in her eyes what I have seen 1,000 times, despair. The Imperium demands sacrifice and calls it salvation. But despair devours faster than any Xeno swarm. To fight what comes, you must become what they cannot imagine. You must endure where they cannot." Valen's hands curled into fists. For a moment he saw himself striking Marbrin down, silencing the serpent's tongue. Yet behind the urge was a deeper pull, temptation. Not of power, but of escape. Escape from the inevitability he saw etched across the stars. Escape from the slow death of loyalty to a machine that ground men to ash and called it glory. "Speak plainly," he said at last, voice raw. What is it you offer? Marbrin's gaze never wavered. There are vaults beneath this fortress, relics sealed before your grandfather's birth, weapons that feed on flesh and thought, knowledge of biotransference and eternal war, stolen from Xenos more ancient than our own stars. With it, you could stand against the swarm as more than a man. You could be immortal, not in memory, not in statues, but in truth, eternal, unbroken. The word fell like a stone in Valen's chest. Immortal. He had feared death, yes, but more than death he feared insignificance, becoming another forgotten name scrawled in red ink in the Adeptus Administratum's endless ledger. To live forever, to fight forever, to be remembered not as dust, but as will unyielding. This was the poison Marbrin poured into him, and his soul drank despite himself. Yet another voice rose in his memory. Dayran, his loyalty simple, unyielding. I will stand beside you until the end. Was that not immortality of its own kind? To be remembered in the heart of another, to die but leave behind a flame. He did not know. He could not know. Marbrin's voice softened, almost gentle. I do not ask you to choose tonight, only to see. Every night the hunger draws closer. Every day more worlds fall silent. When the moment comes and you stand at the edge of extinction, will you cling to oaths that bind you to death, or will you endure? Valen said nothing. His eyes returned to the star charts, to the faint runes that marked systems already gone. The child's words echoed again. They ate the world. The Inquisitor left as silently as he had come. When dawn's cycle came, Valen addressed his captains. They stood in rows, armor polished, faces grim. He told them of the swarm, of Valador's hollow corpse, of the silence that waited for all who denied the truth. His voice was steady, iron-willed, but within it carried the weight of ghosts. He promised they would stand, that Ultramar would not fall, that the Emperor's light still burned. His words lit fire in their eyes, drew steel into their spines. They believed him. They needed to. But when the assembly dissolved and the chamber emptied, Dayran lingered. He studied Valen with sharp eyes, eyes that saw more than most dared. You spoke well, he said quietly, but your voice carried two truths, one for them, another for yourself. I know the difference. Valen turned away, but Dayran pressed on. Do not walk a path that leaves us behind, my lord. We will follow you through death, through ruin, through shadow. But if you choose something else, something that is not ours, you will walk alone. The words struck deeper than any blade, for loyalty was both shield and chain, gift and prison. Valen met his captain's gaze at last, but no answer passed his lips. Dayran saluted, sharp and sure, and departed, leaving the Lord Commander in silence. That night Valen walked again to the battlements, the stars like dim embers over the frozen plains. He held the child's broken toy in his gauntlet, its jagged wings catching the starlight. He whispered into the night as if the void itself might answer. Emperor, if you still hear, give me a path. If you are silent, then forgive me for the one I may choose. The stars did not answer. Only the silence pressed closer, vast and eternal. The void was restless. Even as Macragge's fleets gathered, their hulls gleaming like blades against the black, there was a pressure in the air, a tremor in the Imperium that whispered of wings unfurling across the gulf. The astropaths spoke of silence where there should have been voices, of a choir of stars smothered in shadow. And though reports were still cloaked in denial, the truth seeped through every corridor, every whispered prayer. The hunger was close. Lord Commander Valen stood in the strategium, surrounded by the ghostly light of hololithic projectors. Dozens of systems shimmered before him, each connected by fragile lines of defense. Yet the edges of the map flickered where Tyranid tendrils had begun to breach. He traced them with his gaze, each one like a claw pressing deeper into the galaxy's heart. Every night the claws reached further. Every morning more runes dimmed into silence. The doors opened and Captain Daren entered, helm beneath his arm, eyes weary but sharp. He saluted and stood beside his commander, his voice low. The men are uneasy. They feel it, even without words. They dream of skies black with wings. Some whisper that the void itself listens when they speak of it. Valen did not look at him. His hand brushed over the projection of Valador's husk, and his thoughts were far away. They are right to fear. The void does listen. It listens, and it answers. Daren frowned. Then tell them the truth. Give them more than silence and half-spoken warnings. Valen turned to him at last, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. If I speak too much truth, I strip away the only thing keeping them upright, faith. A man can march on fear only so long before it consumes him. Faith buys us time. Faith, Daren said bitterly, or lies. Valen did not answer. The silence was enough. From the darkness at the chamber's edge, another voice emerged, quiet yet carrying like a whisper through stone. Faith is a candle. Lies are oil. Alone, either burns out. Together, they blaze until the end. Inquisitor Marbrin stepped forward, his presence like a shadow that had always been there waiting. Daren stiffened at once, his hand tightening on his helm. You, he spat. You slither in like a vulture while men bleed. Marbrin ignored him, his eyes fixed on Valen. The shadow grows. Already I feel its tendrils clawing at the veil. Soon, Commander, your choices will be stripped bare. Will you cling to faith and burn with it, or will you embrace what lies beyond? Daren stepped between them, his stance like a shield. Enough. Your poison does not belong here. Valen raised a hand, halting him. His eyes, however, did not leave Marbrin. You speak as if you know the shape of the swarm. Marbrin's thin lips curved. I have seen more than you imagine. I have read the echoes of Xenos more ancient than your Imperium dares admit. This hunger is not a war to be won. It is a tide to be endured. Those who cling to mortality will be washed away. Those who transcend will stand while others drown. Daren's voice was sharp as steel. Heresy. Marbrin turned to him, unblinking. Truth. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Valen looked between them, caught between the loyalty of his captain and the inevitability in Marbrin's words. He could feel the storm building in the void, pressing closer with every heartbeat. At last, Valen spoke, his voice low. Leave us. Daren's face hardened. My lord, leave us. The command cut like a blade. Reluctantly, with eyes full of anger and warning, Daren bowed and departed, the doors hissing shut behind him. Now alone, Valen faced Marbrin. Speak. No riddles, no veiled threats. Tell me what you offer. The Inquisitor stepped closer, his shadow mingling with the pale light of the map. There are vaults beneath this fortress, buried before your fathers were born. Relics of the war in heaven, fragments of knowledge the Necrontyr sought to bury. Biotransference, the art of making flesh endure beyond death. I can open those vaults. I can give you what you fear to name. Immortality. The word hung between them like a curse. Valen's throat tightened. He had heard it before, but to hear it spoken without disguise made it real. And the price? Marbrin's gaze was unflinching. The price is yourself, your soul, if you believe in such things. your place among men. You will cease to be their commander, their brother, their equal. You will become something else, something eternal, and they will never forgive you. Valin's hand gripped the edge of the console until his knuckles whitened. He thought of Dairon, of his loyalty that would stand until the end. He thought of the child from Valador, her hollow eyes staring as she whispered of skies that screamed. He thought of the Emperor, silent for 10 millennia, enthroned in deathless ruin. Was that not immortality of its own kind? And if so, was this any worse? Marbrin's voice softened, almost tender. You asked once, would you endure? This is the answer, the only one that remains. Valin closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw visions. Endless wings blotting out the stars, oceans boiling into rivers of flesh, fortresses falling as their stones were devoured. And he saw himself standing amidst it, not as dust, not as a forgotten corpse, but as something still unbroken, still standing. He saw eternity, and he felt both dread and longing. When he opened his eyes, Marbrin was still there, watching, waiting. I will not choose tonight, Valen said, his voice hoarse, but I will not forget. Marbrin inclined his head, as if patience was his only companion. The shadow draws closer. You will not have many nights left. He turned and slipped into the dark, vanishing as if the shadows themselves had swallowed him. Valen stood alone in the strategium, the hololithic stars flickering like dying candles around him. He pressed his hands to the console, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. It was the face of a commander, of a servant of the Emperor, of a man bound by oaths. But beneath it, he glimpsed the fracture lines, the cracks where temptation had already seeped in. He whispered to his reflection, his voice so faint the void might claim it before his ears did. If I endure, what will I become? The stars offered no answer, only silence, vast and waiting, as the shadow pressed closer. The first world fell without warning. It was a mining colony on the fringe, a place of iron mountains and oceans black with oil, where the people had carved their lives in silence beneath the stars. One night their skies turned to shadow. By dawn, their cities were gone. Vox channels carried only static, save for a final message that lasted less than a minute. Screams, the sound of stone tearing as though the earth itself had been devoured, then silence. When the nearest patrol fleet arrived, there was no trace of life, no bodies, no ruins. Only a hollow planet, scarred and stripped, circling a sun that seemed dimmer than before. Reports flooded into Macragge within days, each more frantic than the last. Systems along the fringe spoke of stars winking out, of skies alive with wings, of seas that rose like walls of flesh. Some believed, most denied. But for Valen, the truth was undeniable. The swarm had arrived. Hive Fleet Behemoth had breached the borders of Ultramar. The Lord Commander stood upon the walls of the fortress once more, gazing across the frozen plains. Beneath him, regiments drilled in the ice, their banners bright against the white. Yet he could see the fear in their movements, their lines too tight, their formations too rigid, their prayers muttered too quickly. They trained for wars of men, for battles with bolter and blade, not for the hunger that had no face, no voice, no end. The sky above rumbled with the passing of ships, transports bearing reinforcements from across the sector. Each arrival was heralded with cheers, yet beneath it lay desperation. Every ship that came was one more hand trying to hold back a tide that could not be turned. Valen knew it, though he dared not speak it. Behind him, the heavy tread of armoured boots approached. Dairon joined him at the parapet, helm under his arm, his scarred face weathered by sleepless nights. "Another world lost," he said, voice low. "Calthan still calls it coincidence. He says pirates or warp storms." Valen's jaw tightened. Calthan is blind, or worse, he wishes to be. Then what do we do? Daeron's gaze was steady, though the weariness in his eyes betrayed him. "We cannot hold every system. Already the lines are too thin. Every day we reinforce one place, another grows weaker. If this swarm is as you say, then where do we stand?" Valen did not answer at once. His hands gripped the cold stone of the battlement, and he felt again the weight of choice pressing upon him. He thought of Marbrin's words, of vaults buried in silence, of promises whispered in shadows. He had not spoken of them, not even to Daeron, yet they clung to his thoughts like frost. To endure, to be eternal. Was that the path, or was it betrayal? Before he could answer, the klaxons wailed. Their sound cut across the citadel, shrill and merciless. Officers ran across the battlements, shouting orders, their voices barely audible above the alarm. A fleet had emerged from the void, its signals broken but unmistakable. The Tyranids had arrived. Valen turned to Daeron, his eyes burning. "Sound the muster. Every regiment to their stations. Fleet to high orbit. We meet them now." Daeron saluted, his face grim, and disappeared into the chaos. The command chambers filled with light and voices, maps shifting to show the approaching swarm. At first it seemed like a fleet of ships, scattered but vast. Yet as the image sharpened, the truth revealed itself. They were not ships, but living things. Vast creatures the size of cruisers, their bodies armoured in chitin, their movements fluid and alien. Smaller organisms swarmed around them in clouds, their numbers uncountable. The stars themselves dimmed behind the tide of flesh. Fear rippled through the officers. Some cursed, some prayed, some fell into silence. Valen stood at the centre, his shadow cast across the map. His voice was cold iron. "We hold orbit. We strike with every weapon we have. No retreat." The order carried through the fleet. Engines roared, weapons charged, and the sky above Macragga filled with fire. Lances of plasma and streaks of torpedoes tore into the void, ripping apart the first wave of the swarm. Great beasts shattered under the bombardment, their bodies bursting into clouds of burning ichor. For a moment, there was hope. For a moment, it seemed the Imperium's steel might hold. But the swarm did not break. For every creature destroyed, 3 more emerged from the void. Their corpses were consumed even as they fell, devoured by smaller organisms that fed on death and turned it into strength. The tide pressed closer, unrelenting. Valen watched from the command deck, his hands gripping the rail. He could hear the prayers of his officers, the crackle of broken vox as ships cried for aid, the thunder of battle echoing through the walls. His heart pounded with fury, with dread, with the gnawing whisper of inevitability. Then came the boarding. Smaller organisms, spore pods launched through void and fire, crashed into the fleet. Ships groaned as their hulls were breached, their decks flooded with claws and teeth. Vox channels filled with screams, with reports of corridors turned to slaughterhouses. The Tyranids were inside. Valen's own ship shuddered as impacts tore through its plating. Sirens wailed, lights flickered, and the decks shook with the thunder of claws. He drew his blade, the ancient power sword gifted to him by the chapter masters of Ultramar, and turned to his guard. "Hold the corridors. Not one beast passes. If we fall as steel." The corridors erupted in chaos. Tyranids poured through shattered bulkheads, their bodies a blur of claws and fangs. Bolters roared, blades clashed, the air filled with the stink of ichor and smoke. Varlin fought at the front, his sword a streak of light carving through flesh and bone. Each strike killed, yet for every beast that fell, another surged forward. The tide was endless. He fought with fury, with desperation, with the weight of every oath he had sworn. His blade sang, his armor cracked, his blood mingled with ichor. Around him men fell, screaming, but others pressed forward, their voices raised in defiance. The corridors became rivers of blood, and in the chaos, Varlin heard it. A whisper, not from the beasts, not from his men, but from within. Marbrin's voice, echoing in the marrow of his bones. You cannot win. You can only endure, become more, or be devoured. For a heartbeat, Varlin faltered. The whisper coiled through his thoughts, tempting, inevitable. He looked upon the tide, upon the endless swarm pressing closer, and he felt the truth of it. No matter how many they killed, the hunger would not end. He struck again, his blade cutting through a beast's skull, ichor spraying across his armor. His voice rose above the din, a roar that shook the corridor. We stand. Even if the stars fall, we stand. The men rallied, their bolters firing in unison, their blades carving with desperate strength. The tide slowed, if only for a breath. But in Varlin's heart, the whisper remained. The corridors burned with smoke and ichor. Alarms howled in every chamber, their shrill cries drowned at times by the thunder of bolters or the shriek of claws tearing through steel. Lord Commander Valen pressed forward through the carnage, his sword alive with blue fire, each strike cutting arcs through the living tide. His armor was scarred, streaked with black blood, but his eyes burned brighter than any wound. Around him, men rallied, voices hoarse with defiance, yet always the swarm pressed closer. The void outside the hull was no longer visible, swallowed by shapes that blotted out the stars. Spore pods rained like fire across the fleet, their impact shaking the decks until it seemed the fortress ships themselves groaned under the strain. Each explosion split open corridors, and from the ruptures poured more creatures, gaunts with blades for arms, beasts whose jaws gnashed through ceramite as if it were paper. Varlin knew the tide could not be stopped. Each step forward was bought with lives that could never be replaced. Yet still he pressed on, dragging his warriors with him. Their voices rose in fractured chants, half prayer, half war cry. For the Emperor, they roared, though their eyes betrayed the fear of men who had glimpsed eternity's maw. Through the haze, Varlin saw Daeron, his scarred face streaked with blood, his blade rising and falling in rhythm. They fought back to back, the tide hammering at them in waves. We cannot hold this corridor, Daeron bellowed above the roar. We must seal it, fall back to the inner decks. Varlin struck a beast through its chest, tearing free in a shower of ichor. If we seal this corridor, we lose the reactor controls. The ship dies here, and with it, us all. Then what choice remains? Daeron shouted. His voice was ragged, yet still it carried the loyalty that had never faltered. And then the choice was taken from them. The deck beneath their feet shuddered, ruptured, and collapsed as a monstrous form tore upward through the plating. A carnifex, its bulk dwarfing the men around it, slammed onto the corridor floor. Its claws carved through walls, its maw bellowed with a roar that seemed to shake the air itself. Soldiers broke formation, fear overwhelming discipline. Some fired blindly, others fled. The beast charged, and for a moment Varlin felt the inevitability of death. Yet he did not yield. With a roar that matched the monster's, he hurled himself forward, his blade striking sparks from its chitin hide. The Carnifex reeled, claw lashing out to send him sprawling, armor dented, ribs aching. Daeron rushed to his side, dragging him up. "You cannot kill that thing alone." But Valen's eyes burned, his voice raw with fury. "Then I will not be alone." He raised his blade high, shouting so his men could hear, so they would not run. "Stand. If you flee, the Emperor himself will not forgive you. Stand and fight." Something in his voice broke through their terror. The men rallied, bolters roaring, grenades hurled into the beast's gaping maw. Daeron struck at its legs, while Valen, battered but unyielding, drove his blade deep into its throat. The Carnifex shrieked, ichor spraying in torrents, before it collapsed in a thunder that shook the deck. For a heartbeat, silence followed. The men gasped, wide-eyed, as though they could not believe they yet lived. Then cheers rose, ragged but fierce. They had slain the unkillable, if only for a moment. But Valen felt no triumph. His hands trembled on the hilt of his sword, his mind echoing with whispers. Not the cheers of men, not the hiss of dying beasts, but Marbrin's voice, curling through the smoke like a serpent. "This is but one. For every beast you kill, 1,000 more wait. You cannot fight them as you are. You cannot endure as flesh." He staggered, gripping the wall as the whisper gnawed at him. Daeron noticed, his eyes narrowing. "My lord, what is it?" Valen forced the words out, steady though his heart quaked. "Nothing. The battle is not done. We push forward." They pressed on, through wreckage and fire, sealing breaches where they could, burning nests of ichor before they grew. Every step deeper into the ship cost them blood. Men fell screaming, dragged into shadows, their cries silenced by jaws that never stopped. Yet still they fought, because there was no choice. Hours bled into one another. The ship was a graveyard of smoke and broken steel, the corridors echoing with prayers whispered by the dying. When at last they reached the inner decks, Valen collapsed against the bulkhead, his armor cracked, his sword's light dimmed. The men who remained were fewer than half those who had begun. Their eyes were hollow, their breaths ragged. Daeron knelt beside him, his voice low but sharp. "You cannot carry this alone, my lord. You drive yourself past the breaking point, and for what? You cannot save them all." Valen's gaze was distant, fixed on nothing. "If I fall, they fall. If I yield, the swarm devours us whole." "And if you choose a path that is not theirs?" Daeron pressed. His words were cautious, edged with suspicion. "What then? Will you still stand with us, or will you stand apart?" Valen looked at him then, truly looked, and saw the question in his eyes. Somehow, Daeron knew. Not the details, not the whispers of immortality, but enough to see the fracture. His throat tightened, but he spoke nothing. Silence was answer enough. Daeron's jaw clenched. He rose, turning from him. "Then remember this. Whatever path you walk, if it leads you away from your men, you walk it alone." Valen closed his eyes, the words cutting deeper than any claw. Around him, the deck shook with distant impacts, the endless tide pressing against their defenses. His heart pounded, torn between loyalty and temptation, between faith and survival. The whisper returned, patient, inevitable. "Would you endure?" He clenched the hilt of his blade until his gauntlet creaked. The question lingered, heavier than steel, heavier than the swarm itself. And in the darkness beyond the hull, Hive Fleet Behemoth spread its wings wider, blotting out the stars. The halls of Macragge's fortress groaned under the weight of endless preparation. Servitors dragged crates of munitions through echoing corridors, their steel feet clanging like funeral drums. chaplains intoned litanies over squads who knelt in prayer, their heads bowed, their voices trembling with both faith and dread. Across the ice fields, armoured columns rumbled into formation, their engines coughing clouds of smoke into the frozen air. The shadow of war was no longer distant. It pressed against the gates, and all of Ultramar felt its breath. Lord Commander Valen walked the length of the arming halls, his boots striking sparks from the stone. Around him, men looked up as he passed, their eyes pleading for assurance. Some whispered blessings, others clutched charms, others merely stared, hollow with exhaustion. They looked to him as they always had, as a figure of iron who could not bend. He returned their gaze, but inside he felt the fracture widening. That night, as the fortress sank into restless silence, he found himself in the lower vaults, corridors long abandoned, their walls damp with age. Few dared to walk here, but Valen's steps echoed with certainty. He knew he would find Marbrin waiting. The Inquisitor stood before a sealed door of black stone, its surface carved with runes older than human memory. His hood was lowered, his eyes gleaming with the light of secret knowledge. "You came," Marbrin said softly, as if he had never doubted. Valen stopped a pace away, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You brought me here once before in words. Now you bring me in flesh. Show me." Marbrin pressed a palm to the stone. The runes flared faintly, sickly green, and the door groaned open with the sound of a tomb disturbed. The chamber beyond was vast, lit by cold luminescence, its walls lined with stasis vaults that hummed like slumbering beasts. Inside them floated relics that twisted the eye, fragments of alien machines, shards of bone that pulsed faintly as if alive, weapons that seemed less crafted than grown. Valen's breath caught, though he did not let awe soften his voice. "These are Xeno's abominations." "These," Marbrin whispered, "are survival. Secrets buried since the war in heaven, when races older than mankind learned to bind soul to metal, thought to eternity. Biotransference, immortality. You could wield it. You could stand while this galaxy falls to ash." Valen stepped closer to one of the vaults. Within floated a helm of alien design, its surface rippling as though it breathed. His reflection warped across its surface, showing him a face both familiar and strange, etched with lines that were not scars, but something older. For a moment, he could not look away. Marbrin's voice coiled through the silence. "Do you think the Emperor himself did not know of such things? He sits upon a throne of corpses, his body long dead, his will sustained by mechanisms as foul as these. Yet men worship him still. If he may be immortal, why not you?" Valen tore his gaze from the helm, his chest heaving. "And what would I become? A monster, an echo. No longer man, no longer commander, no longer brother to those who bleed for me." Marbrin stepped closer, his eyes unblinking. "You would become necessity. They will curse you, yes. They will call you heretic, abomination, oathbreaker. But when they are gone and the swarm still feeds, who will remain to fight? Not Calthan, blind with pride. Not Daron, loyal but mortal. Only you if you endure." Valen's fist clenched. The faces of his men rose in his mind. Daron, scarred and unyielding, standing beside him through fire. The child from Valador, whispering of skies alive with wings. The nameless soldiers whose blood soaked the decks while he shouted for them to stand. All mortal, all doomed. Could he betray them by outliving them, or betray them by dying when he might have endured? His voice broke into the chamber, ragged. "If I take this path, I lose myself." Marbrin's reply was quiet, final. "If you do not, you lose everything." The silence pressed like stone upon Valen's chest. He turned from the vaults, his shadow stretching long across the chamber floor. His steps were heavy, his heart heavier still. He did not touch the relics, not yet. But as the door closed behind him, he knew the line had shifted. Temptation was no longer outside. It lived within him. When he returned to the upper halls, dawn's cycle had begun. The banners hung limp in the cold air, their colours muted, their prayers worn thin by repetition. Darren awaited him in the strategium, his face set in grim resolve. "The swarm grows," he said. "Another system lost. Calthan refuses to shift his fleets, and already his line falters. If he breaks, the swarm will pour through unchecked." Valen's gaze hardened. "Then we cannot allow him to break." Darren studied him, eyes narrowed. "There is something in you, my lord. Something changed." Valen met his stare, and for a moment the weight of secrets pressed between them. He thought of speaking, of telling Darren of the vaults, of the choice that gnawed at him. But loyalty cut both ways, and he knew the truth would wound deeper than silence. Instead, he said only, "War changes all men." That evening, Valen stood upon the battlements once more. The stars above seemed dimmer still, as though the swarm already consumed their light. He raised his sword, the steel catching the faint glow. His men gathered below, voices rising in prayer, their eyes on him. He spoke not of immortality, not of forbidden relics, but of duty, of the Emperor, of Ultramar. His words were iron, his tone unyielding. They cheered, though the fear did not leave their eyes. And when the cheers faded, Valen stood in silence, the blade heavy in his hand, the whisper heavier in his soul. Would he endure? The question lingered, sharp as the cold air, relentless as the tide pressing closer with every breath. In the deepest vaults, beneath stone and silence, the relics waited. The sky above Macragga was no longer the sky. It had become a living storm, a churning mass of shadow that blotted out the stars and turned the void into a sea of wings and teeth. Hive Fleet Behemoth had arrived in full, its tendrils spreading across the system like veins of night, each one pulsing with the hunger of uncountable creatures. The Imperium's fleets formed a wall of steel around the fortress world, their guns blazing with ceaseless fire, but even their fury was swallowed by the tide. Lord Commander Valen stood upon the command dais of his flagship, the Iron Faith, his gauntlets pressed against the tactical console as the hololithic map pulsed with red. Dozens of enemy organisms swarmed at the edges, each larger than cities, each vomiting smaller beasts into the void. His fleets fired, and still the map darkened. He had prepared for this moment, but preparation felt like a thin shield against eternity. "Outer ring collapsing," an officer shouted, his voice cracking. "Admiral Calthan's line is breaking. He refuses to withdraw." Valen's jaw tightened. He could see it on the display. Calthan's ships pressed too far, isolated, their guns roaring but surrounded. Pride had bound the Admiral tighter than any chain. Now it dragged him toward death. "Signal him again," Valen ordered. His voice was iron, though his heart beat like a war drum. "Tell him to fall back to the second perimeter. If he refuses, mark his position and prepare to cover the retreat ourselves." The officer saluted and obeyed, though his eyes betrayed the question none dared to ask. How long could any perimeter last? The ship shuddered, its decks vibrating as the swarm slammed against its shields. Outside, the void lit with the fury of plasma batteries, the streaks of torpedoes, the thunder of detonations that seemed to shake the heavens. Yet for every beast destroyed, 10 more pressed closer, their corpses devoured even as they fell. their matter recycled into fresh horrors. Varlin's gaze was steady, but within, the fracture widened. He could hear Marbrin's whisper, even above the roar of battle. You see now, you feel it. Mortality cannot hold against this tide. You cannot fight as you are. You cannot endure as flesh. He clenched his fists until the steel creaked. Not now. Not yet. But the whisper remained, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Boarding pods incoming, another officer cried. Dozens, no, hundreds. Impact shook the ship like thunder. Varlin's voice cut through the alarms. Deploy counter teams. Seal the inner decks. No beast takes this vessel while I breathe. Soldiers rushed to their stations. Bolters clutched tight, prayers on their lips. Varlin drew his blade, its blue fire hissing against the air. He did not wait for the tide to come to him. He strode into the corridors, Daeron at his side, the loyal captain's scarred face set in grim defiance. The first wave struck like a storm. Gaunts poured through ruptured hulls, their screeches piercing, their claws tearing through armor and flesh alike. Bolters thundered, blades clashed, corridors filled with smoke and ichor. Varlin fought at the forefront, each strike of his sword carving through the swarm, each motion fueled by fury and the will to stand. Daeron fought beside him, his voice raw with commands, his blade rising and falling without pause. The men held, for a time. But then the larger beast came. Warriors whose armoured forms towered over men, their talons like scythes, their eyes burning with alien hunger. They smashed through the barricades, scattering soldiers like broken dolls. Varlin met one head-on, his sword clashing against its claws. Sparks showered, ichor sprayed, the air shook with the clash. He struck again and again, until the beast fell in a heap of twitching limbs. Yet even as it died, two more emerged from the breach. The corridor became a slaughterhouse. Men screamed, beasts shrieked. The walls themselves groaned with the weight of violence. Varlin's body ached, his armor cracked, his breath came ragged. But still he fought, refusing to yield an inch. His sword blazed, his voice roared, and the men clung to him like a beacon. And yet, through the din, he felt it, inevitability. For every beast slain, another rose. For every barricade built, another fell. The tide did not stop. The tide did not falter. The tide only consumed. He stumbled, a blow sending him crashing against the wall. Daeron dragged him up, blood streaking his face, eyes blazing. We cannot hold. We must fall back to the core. Valen's gaze locked with his captain's. He saw the truth there. Loyalty unbroken, but laced with despair. He knew Daeron would follow him to the end, but he also knew what the end looked like. It looked like this: a corridor drowning in ichor, a fleet burning in the void, an empire crumbling under hunger's shadow. Marbrin's whisper returned, not from the shadows, but from within him. Would you endure? Or will you die here, forgotten, devoured like all the rest? You could live. You could be eternal. The choice is yours. For a moment, Varlin faltered. His grip on his blade slackened. He saw himself stepping into the vaults, taking the relics, becoming something more, something unbroken. He saw eternity. He saw survival. Then Daeron's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. My lord, look at me. Do not let them take you. Varlin blinked, the vision shattering. He tightened his grip, his blade flaring once more. With a roar, he charged back into the tide, his men following with cries that were half defiance, half despair. They fought like dying stars, burning bright though they knew their light would fade. The corridor held, for now. The beasts fell in heaps, their ichor slick across the floor, their screeches fading into silence. Smoke filled the air, blood stung the nose, the dead lay thick among the living. But they had not fallen. Not yet. Valen stood amidst the ruin, his chest heaving, his blade dripping. Around him, the survivors slumped against the walls, their eyes hollow, their faith stretched thin. Daeron leaned on his sword, his breath ragged, his gaze locked on his commander. "You carry something in you," he said softly, words edged with accusation. "Something you do not speak. I see it. I feel it." Valen's throat tightened, but he said nothing. Silence was his own confession. Daeron straightened, his voice hoarse but steady. "Whatever path you walk, do not leave us behind. Do not abandon the men who still believe in you." Valen met his gaze, but the words would not come. His silence lingered, heavier than the battle just fought. Beyond the walls, the swarm pressed closer. The void trembled with their hunger, and deep within, the whisper remained, patient as eternity. Snow fell upon Macragge's ice fields, though the flakes carried ash instead of purity. The fortress walls trembled with the thunder of artillery as the Tyranids descended in waves. Their forms darkened the sky, blotting out dawn, their wings spreading across the heavens like a living eclipse. The defenders of Ultramar fired until their weapons blistered their hands, until their voices broke with prayers shouted into the wind, but the swarm came on without end. Valen stood among them, his cloak torn, his armor blackened, his blade burning with crackling light. He no longer commanded from the strategium, but from the trenches themselves, where his men could see him bleed and strike and refuse to yield. Every cry of despair he answered with a roar. Every faltering line he steadied with his presence. Yet in his chest, the weight grew heavier with each moment, for he knew what they did not, that every stand was only delay, every victory only borrowed time. The spires of Macragge burned in the distance, smoke rising into a sky that no longer belonged to man. Tyranid spores fell like fire searing into the ground, disgorging beasts that shrieked and tore through stone. The air itself stank of ichor, thick and choking. The ground quaked as a monstrous form, larger than a fortress tower, lumbered into view. Its carapace glistened with frost, its maw bristling with fangs that dripped steaming saliva. A Herodal, bred only for annihilation, charged the barricades with a bellow that split the air. Valen was there when it struck. Its claws tore tanks to ruin. Its feet crushed men like insects. The line buckled, soldiers faltered, screams rose above the roar of guns. Valen leapt forward, his sword flaring as he struck at the beast's claw. Sparks showered, ichor spattered, the blade carving deep. The Hierodule shrieked, its talons sweeping toward him, but he rolled aside, rising again with fury. Daeron appeared at his side, his armor fractured, his blade dented, but his eyes still alight. "Together," he shouted. They struck in unison, carving at the monster's joints, dodging its claws by the breadth of heartbeats. Grenades detonated beneath its belly, the blast hurling shrapnel and fire into its hide. Soldiers rallied, firing into the wounds Valen carved. With a final roar, Valen drove his sword deep into the beast's neck, pushing with every ounce of strength, every scrap of will. The Hierodule convulsed, its shriek fading into a gurgle before it collapsed, shaking the ground as it fell. For a breath, the line held. Men cheered, their voices ragged but fierce. Yet Valen did not raise his sword in triumph. He could see beyond the smoke, beyond the wreckage. More shadows moved across the horizon. More titanic shapes advanced. The swarm never ended. When night fell, the survivors huddled in the ruins of a fortress wing, their faces gaunt, their armor battered. Fires flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed too fragile to stand against the dark. Darren sat beside Valen, his hand pressed to a wound that bled through cracked ceramite. His voice was low, weary but unyielding. We cannot hold forever, even with the fleet, even with the walls. This is not war. It is drowning. Valen's gaze lingered on the flames. The whispers pressed harder than ever, curling through his thoughts with the certainty of a tide. You know this truth. You cannot win as you are. You cannot endure as flesh. Take what waits below, become what must be, or fall with the rest. He spoke at last, his words scarcely above the crackle of fire. Would you still follow me, Darren, if I changed, if I became something other than man? Darren turned, his scarred face pale in the firelight. I would follow you to death, my lord, but if you left us, if you stepped onto a path that was no longer ours. His voice faltered, then hardened. Then I could not. The words cut deeper than any wound. Valen closed his eyes, hearing in them the echo of every oath he had sworn, every soldier who had looked to him with trust. Loyalty was a gift, but also a chain. To keep it was to die. To break it was to endure. The hours crawled, marked only by the distant thunder of the swarm and the screams carried on the wind. Valen did not sleep. He walked the ruined halls of the fortress, the child's broken toy still hidden in his gauntlet, its jagged edges digging into his palm. He felt the weight of history pressing upon him, the inevitability of choice. At dawn, the swarm struck again. This time they came with beasts that tunneled beneath the earth, bursting from the ice in showers of stone and blood. The ground split, the trenches filled with chittering claws, the walls crumbled beneath their assault. Valen fought as though possessed, his sword a blur of light, his voice carrying above the roar. Men clung to him, fought with him, died beside him. Yet still they fell back, step by step, breath by breath. In the midst of the chaos, a great spore crashed into the inner courtyard, bursting open to disgorge a broodlord taller than any man, its claws dripping, its eyes burning with psychic hunger. It tore through squads with terrifying speed, its movements a blur of inevitability. Valen faced it, his blade raised, his heart pounding with both dread and defiance. Their clash was fury and shadow. His blade met its claws, sparks flying, steel against alien chitin. The broodlord's mind pressed against his, a psychic scream that tore at his thoughts. He faltered, staggered, his blade nearly torn from his grasp. In that instant, the whisper surged louder than ever, drowning even the beast's roar. Endure. Take eternity. You could slay this creature with a gesture. You could end this tide. Only choose. Valen's knees buckled. The broodlord loomed over him, its claw raised for the killing blow. Then Darren struck from the side, his blade plunging into its flank. The beast shrieked, turning upon him, claws tearing into his armor, blood spraying across the ice. Darren fell, his voice still shouting defiance even as his body broke. Valen roared, his fury igniting. He rose with strength not his own, driving his sword deep into the broodlord's chest, pushing until the blade tore through its back in a spray of ichor. The beast writhed, shrieked, then collapsed, dragging Valen down with it. He staggered free, his armor cracked, his breath ragged, his sword dripping with alien blood. He looked to Darren. The captain lay broken, his lifeblood staining the snow. His eyes met Valen's one final time, and in them was no fear, only sorrow. Do not leave us, he whispered, before his voice faded into silence. Valen knelt beside him, the world collapsing around them, and felt the weight of the choice crush him. Loyalty lay dead at his feet. Eternity called from the vaults below. Above, the swarm shrieked, blotting out the sun. Snow and ash mingled across the courtyards of Macragga, the ground a mosaic of blood, fire, and ruin. The swarm pressed from every direction, its screeches a constant storm that drowned even the roar of bolters and the thunder of artillery. Smoke coiled upward into the sky, but the sky itself was no longer the Emperor's. It belonged to wings, to chitin, to a hunger that no weapon could silence. Lord Commander Valen stood amid the wreckage, his armour fractured, his blade dripping ichor and blood alike. Around him, men fought and fell, their prayers cut short, their faith pressed to breaking. But his eyes were fixed not on the tide, but on the body at his feet. Daeron, scarred and loyal to the end, lay still upon the broken stone, his blood pooling into the cracks as if the fortress itself would drink it. His final words still echoed in Valen's chest. "Do not leave us." Valen's gauntlet trembled as he closed Daeron's eyes. For a moment, he felt the weight of years, the marches across dead worlds, the battles fought shoulder to shoulder, the laughter rare and fleeting but real. A man who had believed, a man who had never doubted, now gone, devoured by the tide that would not stop. The whisper came again, curling through the roar of battle, soft yet sharper than any blade. "See how faith ends. See how loyalty dies. You could have saved him. You could have stood beyond death. You could have endured." Valen rose slowly, his sword hanging at his side. Around him the courtyard quaked with the force of monstrous claws tearing through walls. Warriors screamed as a new wave poured forth, gaunts swarming like rivers of flesh, warrior beasts cutting down squads with scything limbs. Above them, gargoyles shrieked as they descended, wings slicing through the smoke. The defenders fired until their magazines ran dry, fought with bayonets and fists when nothing else remained. Still, they were drowned, dragged screaming into the dark. Valen's voice rose above it all, hoarse but commanding. "Hold the line. Macragga does not fall." His words drew strength into broken men, brought them one more breath, one more strike. Yet even as they rallied, Valen knew he was lying. The line would break, Macragga would fall. The swarm would not stop until nothing remained. A monstrous roar split the air, and from the shattered gates lumbered another horror. Larger than any tank, its carapace bristling with spines that spat gouts of acid. A Tyrannofex, its cannon-like maw vomiting streams of corrosive bile, swept fire across the barricades. Stone melted, men screamed as their armour dissolved into their flesh. The courtyard filled with the stench of burning bodies. Valen charged. His sword sang with crackling light as he struck at the beast's legs, carving through sinew and bone. The Tyrannofex bellowed, its massive claw slamming into the ground, hurling him backward. He crashed into the rubble, his ribs screaming with pain, his vision blurred with blood. He staggered up, teeth clenched, refusing to yield. Again he struck. Again the blade carved deep, until at last the beast toppled with an earth-shaking crash. Cheers rose from the survivors, but they were hollow, fleeting. For as the Tyrannofex fell, two more beasts appeared in the smoke, their screeches rattling the very stones. Valen's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of inevitability. His men were dying for moments, while eternity demanded another answer. The whisper pressed closer, no longer distant, but inside him, inside his marrow, his thoughts. You cannot hold this. You cannot win this. But you can endure. Beneath the fortress, the relics wait. Claim them. Save yourself. Become more than flesh. You will never fail again. Valen's heart thundered. His men fought and died around him. Yet his mind was already sinking into the vaults, into the promise buried in silence. He could see it, the helm that breathed, the fragments that pulsed with alien light, the path to eternity. A path that meant betrayal, but also survival. He staggered, his sword heavy, his breath ragged. A soldier rushed past him, face streaked with soot, shouting as he fired into the swarm. The man looked at him once, eyes wide, searching for strength. Varlin met his gaze, and in that instant he felt himself fracture. What answer could he give? To fight and die with them, or to abandon them, to live when all else fell? The fortress shook with another impact, walls crumbling, towers collapsing into the snow. The fleet above screamed over Vox, reports of ships breaking apart, of shields collapsing under the tide. The swarm was everywhere, in the skies, in the earth, in the blood of every soldier who still dared to breathe. Varlin fell to his knees beside Daeron's body, his gauntlets pressed into the blood-soaked stone, his voice breaking. "Forgive me." Then he rose. He turned from the battlefield, his steps heavy, his sword dragging behind him. He walked through fire, through ruin, through men who screamed his name as they fell. Some reached for him, pleading for his command, his presence, but he did not stop. He descended into the fortress halls deeper and deeper, until the screams became echoes and the battle above was only a distant storm. The vault door loomed before him, black stone carved with runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Marbrin stood waiting, as if he had known Valen would come. His hood was lowered, his face pale and calm, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You have seen enough," Marbrin said. "You know the truth. The Imperium will die, but you will not. Take what lies within. Endure." Valen's chest heaved, his gauntlets trembling as he laid his hand upon the stone. The runes flared, green light spilling across his face, twisting his reflection into something inhuman. He felt the relics stir beyond, felt their promise seep into his veins. Immortality, eternity, betrayal. Above, the fortress screamed as the swarm broke through its final walls. The men of Macragge fought and died without him. Daeron lay cold upon the stones, his last words echoing like a curse. Valen closed his eyes. The stone door groaned, the vault yawned open, and the choice became reality. The vault yawned like the mouth of a tomb. Cold light spilled across Valen's armor, washing the blood and soot into dull shadows. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls lined with stasis vaults that hummed with an alien rhythm, each one holding relics that twisted the eye. Some glowed faintly with colors no human tongue could name. Others pulsed as if they were hearts, without bodies. The air tasted of metal and ash, sharp and bitter, like the breath of a dying star. Marbrin moved at his side, his robes dragging like shadows across the stone. "Here lies your choice," he murmured. "Not in prayers, not in armies, not in walls of steel. All those things are ash. Here is truth, eternity, endurance." Valen's steps echoed as he walked deeper. His sword still hung from his hand, but its weight felt suddenly small, a relic of a world already dead. His gaze caught on a helm encased in glass, its surface fluid, rippling like water though no air stirred. As he drew near, the ripples stilled, and in its sheen he saw his own reflection, but altered. His eyes glowed, his skin carved with lines of fire, his form both human and more than human. He recoiled, but the image clung to his mind. The vaults around him seemed to whisper, a chorus of alien voices not carried by sound, but pressed directly into thought. They spoke of unbroken will, of endless strength, of survival beyond death. They promised that the swarm could be met not with flesh, but with something eternal. something that could not be consumed. Violen pressed a gauntlet to his temple, his breath ragged. What will it make of me? Marbrin's gaze was steady, his voice unyielding. It will make you what you must become. Flesh is weakness. Memory is weakness. Oaths are chains. Cast them off, and you will remain when all else falls. You will no longer be commander of men. You will be weapon against extinction itself. Above them, the fortress groaned with another impact. Distant screams echoed down the stone halls, muffled by tons of rock but unmistakable. The swarm was breaching the last defences. Valin's men were dying, calling for a leader who had abandoned them. The sound burned him more than any wound. He staggered, gripping the railing of a stasis vault. His hand brushed its surface, and it pulsed beneath his touch, responding to him like a living thing. The whisper surged again, louder now, not just Marbrin's voice, but something deeper, older, vast as the stars. Take us, wear us, endure. The hunger consumes, but you will be unconsumable. Be not dust, be forever. Images tore through his mind. He saw himself clad in armor grown into his flesh, his thoughts fused with endless memory. He saw the swarm crash against him and break like waves upon stone. He saw centuries pass, worlds fall, empires rise and crumble, but himself unbroken, still standing, eternal. Yet in those same visions he saw himself alone, hated, cursed, remembered not as saviour but as heretic, immortal not with glory but with exile. His voice broke raw and hoarse. If I do this, I betray them. I betray Deiran. I betray every oath I swore. Marbrin's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, as gentle as a serpent coiling. You betray them more if you die with them. Oaths cannot shield humanity from what comes, but you could. You alone. History does not honour the loyal dead. It honours those who endure. Valen's breath trembled. He closed his eyes, and again he saw Deiran, his scarred face lit by firelight, whispering with his last breath, "Do not leave us." The memory tore at him. To take this path was to leave them all. Yet to refuse was to die beside them and be forgotten in the ledger of the Administratum. Just another name scrawled in red. The chamber pulsed around him, the relic's hum rising to a crescendo. The runes etched into the floor flared, casting long shadows across the walls. The choice demanded itself, immediate and final. Valen sank to his knees before the helm that rippled with alien light. His gauntlet hovered above the glass. His hand shook, torn between two dooms. For one last time he whispered into the silence, voice breaking, "Emperor, guide me." No answer came. Outside the vault, the fortress walls collapsed with a thunder that shook the stone. The screams of his men reverberated down the corridors, joined with the screech of the swarm, the sound of Ultramar dying. Valen's eyes opened. They burned with fury, with grief, with inevitability. Slowly, he lowered his hand, pressing against the glass. The helm pulsed, and the barrier shattered into dust. The relic rose into his grasp, alive, its surface cold and burning all at once. It whispered into his mind, not words but certainty. "You will endure." He raised it above his head. For a heartbeat he hesitated, the weight of loyalty, of oaths, of Deiran's final words anchoring him to the man he had been. But the swarm shrieked above, and eternity pressed its hand upon his shoulder. With a cry torn from the depths of his soul, he lowered the helm onto his head. Agony consumed him. His flesh seared as the helm fused to bone, tendrils burrowing into his skull. His vision shattered into fragments of alien light. His blood boiled, his veins ignited, his body convulsed as the relic remade him. He screamed, his voice echoing not just in the vault, but in the warp itself. The relic devoured his weakness, his mortality, his humanity, and replaced it with something vast, something eternal. When at last the pain receded, Valen rose. His armor had fused with the relic, his form no longer merely man. His eyes glowed with a light that was not human. His thoughts stretched into shapes no mortal could endure. He looked upon the relics around him, and they bent toward him as if in recognition. He was no longer their seeker. He was their heir. Marbrin knelt, his voice trembling with awe. At last, you have chosen. You will not die. You will not be forgotten. You are eternal. Valen's voice was deeper now, layered with echoes, heavy with something inhuman. Eternal. He raised his hand, and the relics thrummed in response, a chorus of alien power rising into the vault. Above, the fortress screamed as the swarm poured in. But in the depths, something else awoke, something the Tyranids would not consume so easily. Lord Commander Valen had chosen. The halls of Macraga shuddered under the assault of the swarm. Even as Lord Commander Valen strode through the corridors, the walls themselves groaning, the floor trembling beneath monstrous feet, he no longer felt the weight of flesh and fear. The relic had remade him, fused him into something more than human, something eternal. His steps carried the certainty of inevitability, each motion precise, inexorable. The soldiers who survived the initial wave stared at him, eyes wide with awe and fear, for he moved not as man, but as will incarnate. Outside, the hive tide crashed against the fortress walls. Gargantuan creatures tore at the bastions, spitting corrosive bile that melted stone into steam. Smaller organisms surged through every breach, their claws raking metal and bone alike. The air above the ice fields was a maelstrom of wings, screeches, and the shimmer of plasma fire. Yet Valen's gaze remained distant, unshaken, as if the chaos belonged to another world entirely. He came upon the inner courtyard, where the last of the defenders rallied, their numbers pitiful, their morale teetering on the edge of despair. They looked to him for guidance, for hope, for the touch of the man who had once led them with flesh and blood. Now, however, he was more than man. His eyes glowed with alien light, his form rippled with power that should have belonged to stars. And in that presence, their courage ignited anew, if only for a fleeting breath. Darren lay somewhere beneath the rubble, his sacrifice etched into Valen's memory. Each detail burned into his mind with perfect clarity. He had fought beside him, shoulder to shoulder, only to be torn from life by claws and fang. Valen felt the echo of loyalty reverberate through his immortal senses, a pulse of grief intertwined with rage. He did not speak to the men. Words were unnecessary. His presence was enough. His aura commanded the battlefield with certainty no mortal could wield. A swarm of Tyranid warriors emerged from a shattered tower, their exoskeletons glinting under the cold light of a dying sun. They charged the courtyard with coordinated precision, instincts honed over millennia. The remaining guardsmen opened fire, bolters spitting death, flamers spewing fire. But their efforts were shallow against the tide. The alien horde advanced unbroken, their numbers endless, their hunger insatiable. Valen moved to meet them. Each step left a mark upon the stone, not of flesh but of presence, a weight that reverberated across the courtyard. His sword flared, a streak of blue fire that cut through the leading warriors. They fell in showers of ichor, yet for each one destroyed, two more surged forward. His voice, when he raised it, was not human, resonant with power that carried across the battlefield. Stand. The survivors steadied, rallied, fired with renewed precision. Their cries rose above the cacophony, their defiance sharp and fierce. Yet still the tide pressed. Valen did not falter. He struck through warriors, leapt across debris, his blade arcs burning through the night. He was everywhere at once, faster than thought, stronger than fear, yet all the while the whisper remained, the same voice that had haunted him since Valador. You endure. You must. You cannot falter. All else is ash. He pressed forward, the horde scattering at his approach, yet never breaking. Their instincts drove them onward, unrelenting. Valen's presence was a beacon, a spear of light through the dark, but even his newfound power had limits. The swarm was infinite, and for every victory gained, another loss followed. Hours passed like centuries. The air was thick with smoke, ichor, and the groans of dying machines. Valen moved as both predator and shield, the men around him clinging to survival by his will alone. They fought with a desperation that was human, fragile, fleeting. He was beyond fragile. He was unbroken. He was eternal. Yet as he pressed forward, he felt it, the price of endurance. Memories of every fallen comrade, every voice silenced, every oath betrayed, weighed upon him like chains forged of iron and fire. Daeron's last words, the pleas of the child from Valador, the screams of soldiers who had looked to him for guidance, all etched into his consciousness, unrelenting, eternal. Immortality had brought power, yes, but it had also brought the burden of endless witness. The Tyranid swarm, sensing weakness in the line, surged anew. A gargantuan carnifex emerged from the snow, spines bristling, mandibles tearing at the air. Valen's blade flared, and he met it with the strength of a man who no longer feared death. He struck, parried, danced between strikes that should have shredded flesh, each movement precise, unyielding. The carnifex shrieked, collapsed, yet the swarm continued its advance. Valen's gaze swept the battlefield. The men fought valiantly, but their lives were fleeting. For all their courage, the tide of the Hive was inexhaustible. The fortress trembled, walls cracking, towers falling into the snow. His immortal senses reached into the void, feeling the pressure of the swarm beyond the horizon, feeling the inevitability of loss. And then he heard it, beneath the chaos, the whisper again, sharp and clear. You endure. You have chosen eternity. All else is consequence. He raised his blade, and with a surge of power, sent a wave through the courtyard. Warriors and beasts alike were hurled back, walls shattering, stones splintering. The momentary calm was a breath in eternity, a fleeting dominion over death and destruction. Yet, in that moment, Valen realized the truth. He would never again walk among men as he once had. Loyalty, friendship, human connection, they were echoes now, intangible, irretrievable. Immortality had granted him power, yes, but it had also carved him from the world he had sworn to protect. He looked at the battlefield, at the men who had followed him through fire and ice, and he felt a weight that no weapon could pierce. For to endure, he had abandoned more than flesh. He had abandoned companionship, trust, hope. They would die, one by one, and he would witness it forever. Eternity was a gift, but its cost was written in every scream, every fall, every broken oath. Valen knelt among the rubble, his blade quivering in the snow, and for the first time since he took the relic, he felt the cold edge of solitude press against him. The men of Macraga had fought with valor unmatched, but they would not survive the night, and he, unbroken, eternal, would remain to see the empire he loved reduced to ash. He whispered to the wind, to the shadow, to the relic fused with his flesh. Is this endurance or curse? The whisper answered, patient and unyielding. It is both, and it is yours forever. Above, the swarm continued its relentless advance, blotting out what little light remained. Below, the fortress trembled, its stones cracking, the men who had stood beside him falling. Varlin rose, his eyes glowing, his blade flaring against the darkness. The battle raged, the world trembling, and he stood unbroken, eternal, a witness to all that would be lost. The void was silent, yet it screamed in 1,000 hidden ways. Macraga lay in ruin, its towers shattered, its walls consumed by fire and ichor. Smoke drifted like ghosts across the ice plains, mingling with snow that fell heavy and grey. The swarm had been vanquished, or at least driven back, though Varlin knew there was no true victory. The horde would return, relentless and unyielding. Only he remained, standing amidst the ruin, eternal and unbroken, a witness to the Empire's final breath. The corpses of soldiers lay scattered across the frozen ground. Their faces were pale, eyes staring, prayers unfinished. Varlin knelt among them, running a gloved hand over a fallen marine's shoulder, feeling the cold, stiff weight of loyalty that had ended too soon. He felt the echo of Daeron beside him, imagined his captain's scarred face, and the unspoken admonition. Do not abandon them. But he had abandoned them all. They had not survived, and he alone endured, eternal, untouched by decay, untouched by death. Above, the sky shimmered with auroras of alien green and crimson, a reflection of the power that now coursed through him. The relics fused to his flesh hummed with life of their own, a symphony of ancient technology and alien consciousness. They whispered promises of immortality, of strength beyond comprehension, of dominion over flesh and matter alike. Yet their song was hollow, resonant with inevitability. You endure, but you pay. All else is lost. He walked through the shattered streets of the fortress city, his steps leaving impressions in snow stained with blood. Buildings twisted, stone crumbled, doors hanging from broken hinges. He saw the marks of the horde, clawed gouges in walls, melted steel, shattered tanks. Each ruin spoke of sacrifice, of lives given to delay the inevitable. And yet Varlin remained, unbroken, unyielding, eternal. The child from Validor appeared in his mind's eye, hollow eyes staring up at him as she whispered of skies alive with wings. He could see her face among the wreckage, a memory frozen in time. And he realized, with a weight heavier than any weapon, that he would carry that memory forever. Immortality did not grant relief. It granted witness, endless witness. Every scream, every death, every betrayal etched into him eternally. He ascended to the highest spire, where the command dais had once been. The winds tore at his cloak, the snow lashing across his glowing armor. From here, he could see the full extent of devastation. The ice fields scoured to grey bone, the fleet scattered in shattered orbits, the horizon crowded with smoke and fire. He raised his sword, the blue light burning brighter than ever, and he shouted into the void, not for men who could no longer hear, but for the universe itself. I endure. His voice carried across the plains, across shattered fleets, across the frozen silence of the cosmos. I endure, and I will not yield. The relics hummed in response, their alien power weaving into his body, into his mind, into his very essence. He could feel the hunger of the universe pressing against him, the weight of eternity, the pulse of immortality. He was no longer a man. He was not commander, not soldier, not savior. He was endurance incarnate, a force beyond flesh, beyond time, beyond pity. And yet, the cost was absolute. He felt it in every echo of the dead, in every every name that would never be remembered, in every oath he had ever sworn and broken. Immortality demanded a price higher than life. He would carry it all, the guilt, the grief, the betrayal, the uncountable deaths of those he could not save. They were etched into his mind, an endless litany that would never cease. He thought of Marbrin, who had guided him here, who had whispered of forbidden relics, who had promised survival at a cost. The Inquisitor's words had been true. The Imperium would not save him. It had demanded sacrifice until nothing remained. Now he understood the depths of that truth. Survival was theirs to wield alone, and he had claimed it, but it was a hollow victory. The horizon darkened as distant shadows moved, remnants of the swarm retreating into the void, their hunger undiminished, their minds calculating, remembering. They would return. Every victory was temporary. Every stand bore a moment, and even that moment was eternal to him. He would witness it, always, as the universe unfolded and decayed around him. He knelt among the ruins, pressing a hand to the ice and snow, feeling the echoes of the fallen. "I am sorry," he whispered, though none remained to hear. "For every life lost, for every oath I could not keep, for every man who believed in me. I am sorry." The relics hummed louder, as if in response, yet they offered no comfort. Their power was absolute, their promise fulfilled, yet it carried no solace. Valen was eternal, but eternity was a crucible of isolation. He had won survival, but he had lost everything else: loyalty, camaraderie, humanity, hope. All that remained was the endless vigil of witness, a solitary flame in the cold void. He rose, the blue fire of his sword casting long shadows across the ice-strewn streets. The wind tore at him, carrying the distant screams of the universe, the endless echoes of those who had fallen. He felt them all, not as memory, but as an eternal weight pressing upon his soul. Every name, every face, every prayer, they were bound to him now, inseparable from his existence. Immortality had made him a god among men in power, but a prisoner among ghosts in conscience. Above, the sky was a silent void, green and crimson auroras fading into black. The remnants of the swarm vanished into the distance, leaving the ice field scarred and empty. Valen stood alone, the fortress shattered, the empire bleeding into silence. Yet he remained, eternal, unbroken, a witness to all that would come and all that would pass. He whispered once more, into the void, into the relics, into the remnants of a world that no longer could call him commander. "I endure. I bear it all. I am the witness, the sword, the flame. I endure." And the stars, dimmed and distant, seemed to flicker in answer. Eternity had a keeper now, and all that lived and all that died would forever pass under his gaze. The price of survival was absolute, the cost of endurance eternal, and Valen had claimed both.